The hammer echoed against pine logs, sharp and rhythmic, a sound that seemed to stitch him back together with each strike. Aditya Rathore paused only long enough to wipe the sweat from his brow and take in the sight around him. 6 acres of rugged hillside spread out beneath the sky, so clean it looked newly washed. The air smelled of resin and wet earth, a perfume money couldn't bottle. For the first time in years, he felt steady. At 44, Aditya was starting over. A divorce had burned through his savings, his city flat felt like a cage, and his daughter barely looked at him without anger in her eyes. Then came his Uncle Vijay's will, a curveball none of the family expected. The eccentric old man, who spent decades hiding in the mountains and showing up at weddings smelling of diesel and wood smoke, had left Aditya the one thing he truly needed: land. 6 acres of it, a chance to build something lasting. And so here he was, 3 days into the construction of a cabin that was more hope than architecture. Nothing grand, just a small log house, a solid roof, a porch where his daughter could sit when she finally decided to visit. He wanted her to see her father not as a man defeated, but as someone who could still raise walls and shape a future. That hope came under threat with the crunch of tires on gravel. A pristine white SUV rolled into view, sunlight flashing across its polished hood. The door opened with theatrical slowness, and out stepped a woman in a tailored jacket, heels clicking against uneven ground as if the mountain itself should have been paved for her convenience. She carried a leather portfolio like a weapon. "Are you the individual responsible for this unauthorized construction?" she asked, each syllable sharpened to a point. Aditya rested the hammer against the log and studied her. She was in her 50s, hair pinned with military precision, and the kind of confidence that came from years of people backing down. "I'm Aditya Rathore," he said, voice calm. "Building a cabin. On my land. I'm Ritu Chauhan, president of the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association." She said the title like it should impress him. She flipped through her folder with deliberate slaps of paper. "This construction violates multiple covenants. No permits. No architectural review. No environmental assessment. And this rustic approach," her eyes flicked over his tools, "poses a serious threat to property values." Aditya turned in a slow circle, gesturing at the wild hillside stretching to the horizon. Not a house in sight, only forest and sky. "What community? I don't see any neighbors." "The Pine Hollow Association governs all residential land in this area." She pulled out an official-looking document. "Your uncle signed these agreements when the association was formed 6 months ago. You inherited his obligations." Aditya's stomach tightened. 6 months ago. Uncle Vijay had died 8 months ago. She thrust another page at him. A cease and desist order demanding he stop immediately, with a bill already tallying thousands in penalties. "Remove all materials within 48 hours, she said. "Daily fines will begin immediately afterward." Her perfume was cloying, choking out the clean scent of pine. He folded his arms. "This is my land. My uncle left it to me." Her smile was cold, polished. "Then perhaps your uncle should have thought more carefully before burdening you with such responsibilities. But let me be clear, this isn't the sort of neighborhood where men in your situation thrive." Her gaze drifted over his scuffed boots, the dented truck, the calloused hands. "You'd hate for your daughter to be embarrassed by unpleasantness." That landed like a punch. She'd looked into his divorce, into his family. She knew about his daughter. "Are you threatening my child?" The words came out sharper than he intended, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm offering friendly advice." She turned back toward her SUV, heels stabbing the dirt. "Some battles aren't worth fighting, Mr. Rathore, especially when you're outmatched." She slid into the driver's seat, but paused, one manicured finger tapping the steering wheel. 48 hours. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The engine hummed, tires crunching as she drove back down the road. Silence returned, but it wasn't the good kind. It pressed heavy on his chest. Aditya picked up the cease and desist notice, the paper shaking slightly in his hand. His eyes drifted to the half-built cabin, the pile of timber, the sweat he'd poured into every beam. He remembered his uncle's raspy voice on their last meeting. "Don't let anyone push you around." Land keeps secrets, and it will fight with you if you fight for it. He set the paper on the workbench and picked up his hammer again. The association president thought she held all the cards. She didn't know the land's history or the secrets buried with it. She had no idea she'd just declared war on the one man capable of turning her threats into the most expensive mistake of her life. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, Aditya didn't pick up his saw. He picked up his truck keys. The cabin could wait. If what that woman said was true, if his uncle had somehow signed away rights to the property after death, then he needed answers written in ink, not perfume-soaked threats. He drove the hour into town, the mountain road curling through mist, his stomach knotted tighter with every turn. The district courthouse was a squat concrete building with flickering fluorescent lights that hummed like dying insects. The clerk behind the counter, a woman in her 60s with thick glasses, raised an eyebrow when Aditya slid the cease and desist notice across the desk. "Pine Hollow Association," she said, lips pursing. "That's new." She disappeared into the archives, the smell of dust and old paper trailing after her. When she returned, she carried a thin folder and a rolled survey map. Aditya leaned forward as she spread the documents. His chest tightened. The association had been incorporated 2 months after Uncle VJ's death, and the boundaries, drawn like a jagged loop around 12 houses, wrapped perfectly around his 6 acres like a noose. "That's suspicious," the clerk murmured, tracing the map with a wrinkled finger. "Looks like someone drafted these lines to capture your parcel specifically." Aditya rubbed the back of his neck. His uncle's land wasn't just inside the boundary. It was the largest piece, 60% of the association's total area. The clerk lowered her voice. "Funny thing is, every signature here, same last names. Relatives of Mrs. Chauhan, or employees of her husband's company." She tapped the file. "This isn't neighborhood governance. It's a family cartel." The words sank like stones. Organized theft, dressed in legal stationery. Aditya knew he needed backup. So that afternoon, he walked into the office of Meera Sharma, a sharp real estate attorney with a reputation for shredding shady developers. Her office smelled of coffee and determination. She scanned the paperwork with quick eyes, scribbling notes as she went. "You're right to be worried," she said finally. "But here's the thing. This covenant can't touch you. Not legally. It's like trying to chain a ghost. Your uncle was gone before this association even existed. You cannot retroactively bind a dead man's land." Relief flickered, but it didn't last. Meera slid the papers back toward him. "The problem is less law and more theater. They'll bury you under bogus notices, scare your neighbors, and bleed you with fake fines. They don't need to win in court if they can make your life hell outside of it." Aditya exhaled slowly. "So they want me to break before I even fight." "Exactly," she said. "This isn't about covenants. It's about leverage. They want your land for something bigger. You need to start collecting evidence. Build your case brick by brick, same as your cabin." That night, he sat by the half-built foundation, staring into the dark pines. Crickets chirped. The creek whispered. But peace was gone. His phone buzzed. A message from a neighbor he'd barely met. "Saw your photo online. People saying you're dangerous. What's going on?" Aditya's blood ran cold. He searched, and there was a brand new Facebook group, Pine Hollow Community Safety. His photo, pulled from an old electricians union newsletter, plastered at the top with the caption, "Beware, outsider threatening property values and community safety." Dozens of comments churned below. "Keep him away from our kids. This man is trouble. Sheriff should act now." The bile rose in his throat. They were painting him as a criminal before he'd even unpacked his life. He set the phone down and clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened. But arrogance leaves footprints. In her rush to rally the mob, Ritu had posted the association's financial summary, proud proof, she claimed, of their strong funding. The numbers slapped Aditya harder than any insult. Over 7 Indian rupees crore collected in special assessments from just 12 families in 6 months. That was more than 60 Indian rupees lakh per household. For what? There were no parks, no community hall, no paved roads. His divorce had taught him one thing. When money vanishes without receipts, it's never by accident. Someone was looting the coffers. Aditya printed every page, highlighting figures until the ink bled. Fraud had a smell, and this stank of desperation. But desperation makes people dangerous. The next day, his truck tires were slashed. He found roofing nails scattered across his driveway, glittering in the morning sun like tiny weapons. And by evening, a fake notice from the Environmental Board landed in his inbox, accusing him of destroying wetlands, the same trickling creek that had been here since long before the association. He sat in his trailer that night, hands shaking over the papers. They thought fear would push him off the land. But Uncle VJ's words came back to him, "Don't let anyone push you around." Aditya wasn't just going to fight. He was going to expose every shadow they tried to hide behind. And the first crack had already appeared. Aditya woke the third morning to the sharp scent of fuel. It was faint at first, woven into the pine air, but as he stepped outside, the truth smacked him full in the face. His lumber pile had been toppled, beams scattered like a storm had torn through. His generator lay on its side, gasoline bleeding into the dirt, leaving an acrid bite in the breeze. For a long moment he just stood there, fists trembling, watching the damage. It wasn't vandalism. It was a message. By noon, the message grew louder. 4 cars parked along the road that led to his property. Not blocking the entrance. No, that would be too easy to prosecute. They lined up just close enough that he had to snake his truck through like an obstacle course. When he confronted the drivers, they smiled with rehearsed innocence. "Public road," one man said, sipping his soda. "We can park here if we want." It was harassment camouflaged as legality, and it made Aditya's blood boil hotter than the spilt gasoline still staining his soil. That night, as rain clouds massed over the ridges, he sat in the workshop his uncle had left behind. The old place smelled of sawdust and rust, with shadows draped across boxes stacked in forgotten corners. He stared at the flickering bulb overhead and thought about the enemy he was facing. Not just one woman with a clipboard, but a machine, a cartel that thrived on intimidation, lies, and corruption. But machines had weak points, and desperate people made mistakes. The very next morning, Mira called with something explosive. "We traced the association filings. Guess what? A resort company approached the county 6 months ago, Mountain Crest Resorts. A 50-crore luxury project planned right here in Pine Hollow. Spa, golf course, helipad. But the catch? They need your 6 acres as the centerpiece." Aditya gripped the phone so hard his knuckles popped. His land wasn't just inconvenient. It was the golden key. And one more thing, Mira continued. The developer paid a community relations consultant 3 Indian rupees crore just after the association formed. No invoices, no breakdown. That's not consulting, Aditya. That's a bribe with a fancy label. Pieces snapped into place. Ritu wasn't protecting community standards. She was cashing in on a massive payday. Every day he resisted was costing her fortune-sized profits. That night, the war turned criminal. Around midnight, Aditya's motion sensors clicked on, floodlights igniting the darkness. A pickup truck crawled down his access road, headlights off, engine growling low. Through the cameras he'd installed 2 days before, he watched a hooded figure step out, carrying a red jerry can. The man knelt by the lumber pile, splashing liquid that glistened under the lights. Then, as if fate itself demanded proof, the intruder lifted his head, straight into the camera lens. Aditya froze. He knew that face. It was Ritu Chauhan, Ritu's son. The kid blinked like a deer caught in headlights, then bolted, fumbling back into the truck before roaring down the road. But the damage was already done. Every second had been recorded in sharp clarity. The can, the face, the license plate. The next morning, Aditya walked into the sheriff's office with a USB drive in hand. The receptionist smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy, but when the deputy saw the footage, his expression turned grim. "This isn't harassment anymore," the sheriff muttered, pausing the video where Arjun's face filled the frame. "This is attempted arson. That boy just bought his mother more trouble than she can afford." Aditya left the office with something new, leverage. For the first time, Ritu's armor had cracked. But the war didn't slow. By afternoon, county inspectors swarmed his property. 3 trucks rolled up, officials spilling out with clipboards and cameras. Environmental compliance, building codes, septic evaluation. They prowled the land like vultures, scribbling citations for violations that didn't exist. One inspector, a weary man with sunburnt cheeks, leaned close as he photographed Aditya's perfectly legal wiring. "Sorry, man," he whispered. "Orders from higher up. Someone's paying serious money to make your life hell." That evening, the sky turned purple with storm clouds. Rain began to patter against his cabin's roof, a steady drumbeat over the chaos of the week. Aditya sat inside, Emma's photo clutched in his hand. His daughter's shy smile stared back, reminding him why he couldn't give in. He'd survived divorce, shame, and years of failure. He'd survived losing everything once already. This time, he wasn't just surviving. He was fighting back. He looked out at the storm and whispered his uncle's words into the dark. "Don't let anyone push you around." But what Uncle VJ hadn't told him was this: when you refuse to be pushed, some people will try to burn the ground beneath your feet. And, judging by the smell of gasoline still clinging to the soil, the fire in the pines had only just begun. The Pine Hollow Community Hall was a squat concrete building at the edge of town, smelling faintly of dust and old coffee. On Friday evening, every chair was filled. Close to 90 people had packed into a space meant for half that, sweat and whispers mixing into a heavy fog of tension. Ritu Chauhan stood at the podium like a queen preparing for coronation. Her suit was sharp, her hair flawless, and her voice carried the practiced confidence of someone who believed the room belonged to her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, clicking to a slide projected on the peeling wall, "we face a clear and present danger. This man," she jabbed a manicured finger at a blown-up photo of Aditya's half-built cabin, "has brought chaos, instability, and threats into our peaceful valley." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Aditya sat in the last row, calm on the surface but coiled tight inside. Beside him, Mira flipped through her notes, lips pressed thin. On her phone, a message from federal investigators blinked. "Evidence of financial fraud confirmed. Waiting for your go." Ritu clicked again. The next slide showed Aditya holding a circular saw, cropped so it looked like he brandished a weapon. "He has terrorized our families, ignored every community covenant, and yesterday was investigated for terrorism by county officials." The crowd buzzed. People who'd never spoken to Aditya were now whispering as if he were a criminal. He gritted his teeth, letting the lies flow like sewage. "And furthermore," Ritu continued, her voice rising with theatrical righteousness, "his actions threaten a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Mountain Crest Resorts is prepared to invest 50 crores in our valley, bringing jobs, prosperity, and higher property values. But only if we rid ourselves of this dangerous squatter." There it was. The mask slipped. For months she had claimed it was about rules and standards, but now the truth leaked into the open. This was about money. Ritu paused for effect. "Does anyone else wish to speak about this threat to our community?" 3 neighbors rose on cue, their testimonies dripping with rehearsed fear. "My children can't sleep," one said. "We feel unsafe walking past his land," another added. Each line was as polished as her PowerPoint slides. Rita leaned in, savoring the momentum. "This man has no right to dictate our future." That was the moment Aditya stood. Slowly, deliberately, leather folder under his arm. The room fell into uneasy silence, all eyes shifting toward him. "You're wrong, Ritu," he said, voice steady but carrying through the hall. "I have every right to speak. In fact, I have more rights here than anyone in this room." Confusion rippled like a sudden gust of wind. Ritu's smile cracked. You're not a member of this association. You don't belong here." Aditya walked down the aisle, each step echoing on the worn floorboards. At the podium, he placed his folder on the table and unlatched it with calm precision. "My name is Aditya Rathore," he announced, "and I am the legal owner of Brennan Holdings Private Limited." He spread documents across the podium. Incorporation papers, property deeds, notarized contracts. The cameras lining the back wall zoomed in as if smelling blood. This company, Aditya continued, was formed by my uncle in 1998. Over the years, it quietly purchased the mortgage debt of this subdivision during the housing crash. Which means, he paused, letting the weight settle. The land beneath every house here belongs to me. Not the association. Not Ritu. Me. The silence was deafening. You could hear the tick of the hall's old clock, the hum of the projector. Then came the shouts, gasps, and scraping of chairs as neighbors turned to one another in shock. Rita lunged forward, grabbing for the papers. Lies. Forged documents. He's a fraud. Sheriff Malik, who had been standing near the door, stepped closer. His expression was grim. These documents bear official seals, Mrs. Chauhan. If true, you've been collecting fees on land you don't own. Aditya pressed further. You claimed I owed $97,000 in fines. But the truth is, you've been stealing from your neighbors. 80 lakh rupees collected in 6 months, no accounting, no projects. Fraud on a massive scale. Ritu's mask shattered. You can't do this, she shrieked, voice echoing off the concrete walls. I built this community. Without me, it's nothing. Aditya met her glare, calm as a mountain lake. You built nothing. You leashed off good people while selling them out to developers. Even your own house sits on land owned by my company. And since you're 3 months behind on payments, I could legally evict you starting tomorrow. Chaos erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Neighbors argued in panicked voices. Sheriff Malik held up his hands, calling for order. But the final blow came not from Aditya, but from the federal agents slipping quietly into the room. They moved straight toward Ritu, handcuffs gleaming under the harsh hall lights. Ritu Chauhan, one agent declared, you are under arrest for financial fraud, wire fraud, and filing false reports. The hall exploded in noise. Some neighbors cheered, others wept. Many simply sat stunned. Ritu struggled as she was led away, screaming, I am this community. You can't do this to me. But her voice faded as the doors slammed, shut behind her. Aditya stood at the podium, facing the shaken crowd. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. I'm not here for revenge, he said, his words cutting through the chaos like a knife. I'm here to offer partnership, to rebuild something real. Those who joined her campaign of harassment have 30 days to move. The rest of you, your rent is cut in half, effective immediately. And together, we can build a community worth living in. The murmurs shifted, no longer fearful, but tentative, hopeful. For the first time since he set foot on his uncle's land, Aditya felt the tide turn. And in that hall smelling of sweat and old coffee, a corrupt empire had just turned to ashes. 3 months later, the valley smelled different. Not of gasoline or fear, but of charcoal, smoke drifting from backyard barbecues, and wildflowers finally left to bloom. The mountains still towered, the creek still sang, but Pine Hollow itself had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Ritu Chauhan was gone. Convicted of fraud, forgery, and filing false reports, she was serving an 18-month sentence in Dehradun. Her empire of intimidation had collapsed like rotten timber. 6 of her loudest allies had quietly packed moving vans and disappeared. The rest of the neighbors were left behind, confused, bruised, but free for the first time in years. Aditya had not forgotten his uncle's words. Don't let anyone push you around. But as he sat on the porch of his nearly finished cabin, he understood something deeper. Strength wasn't about crushing enemies. It was about what came after. He had offered the residents of Pine Hollow a choice. Those who'd spread lies and joined Ritu's campaign of harassment were evicted, leases terminated, their misdeeds documented. But the rest? They were given hope, reduced rents, and even the chance to purchase their land at cost through Brennan Holdings. For the first time, families who thought they owned only their walls and roofs were given a chance at true ownership. The effect was immediate. Instead of funneling money into Ritu's special assessments, families had cash for repairs, education, and dreams. Paint cans appeared on porches. Kids got bicycles instead of warnings about violating property standards. An old woman named Mrs. Sun, who had lived under constant fear of fines, turned her yard into a riot of marigolds and jasmine. No one stopped her. Instead, neighbors praised her flowers, asking for seeds. What had been a prison of rules became a place of growth. The transformation had ripples beyond Pine Hollow. With the money recovered from Ritu's accounts, Aditya and Mira founded the Vijay Rathore Justice Fund, named after the uncle who had hidden the deeds for decades. Its mission was simple: to provide legal aid to families across India fighting corrupt homeowner associations and predatory developers. In 3 months, the fund had already helped expose similar scams in 17 communities. Each time, the story of Pine Hollow spread wider. Each time, more families realized they weren't powerless. But the greatest victory came one crisp autumn evening when Aditya's daughter, Anaya, bounded up the cabin steps, her face glowing. "Papa," she exclaimed, waving a thick envelope. "I got into Delhi University. Full scholarship." Aditya nearly dropped his hammer. "Are you serious?" She shoved the acceptance letter into his hands, grinning. "I love my essay. I wrote about you, about how you taught me that real strength isn't revenge, it's building something better from the ashes of corruption." Tears stung his eyes, and for once, he didn't bother to hide them. He pulled her into a bear hug, the smell of her shampoo mixing with the mountain air. In that moment, everything, the threats, the lies, the vandalism, felt worth it. Later that night, as lanterns glowed across the valley, the community gathered for a potluck dinner. Tables groaned under the weight of biryani, samosas, kheer, and grill corn. Laughter replaced suspicion. Children who once crossed the road to avoid Aditya's land now played cricket in his driveway. Mira arrived late, carrying a stack of papers in one hand and a beer in the other. "Another case," she said, sliding the papers onto his porch table. "Family in Rajasthan. Same playbook as Ritu. Developers trying to grab their farmland under the guise of community development." Aditya sighed, but a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He looked at Anaya, who was already flipping through the papers with the sharp focus of a future lawyer. "We'll help them," Aditya said simply. The valley echoed with children's laughter, the kind of sound that erases ugly memories. Above them, the peaks glowed purple in the fading light, as though the mountains themselves approved. For Aditya, it was never about owning land or winning lawsuits. It was about proving that one ordinary man could still stand against a corrupt system and not only survive, but build something better. And as he sat with his daughter and his neighbors, the Justice Fund's work spreading far beyond these hills, Aditya understood his uncle's wisdom at last. Some secrets are too dangerous in weak hands. But in strong ones, they don't just defend land. They defend hope. The mountains would keep their secrets. But Pine Hollow's secret had been revealed, and from its ashes, a real community had finally risen.